broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Sage Fixed Assets Learning Series webinar, where we'll be showing you some of the features that make our product so powerful and user-friendly, customizing fields, creating smart lists, and customizing the asset list view. My name is Ann Thornson, and I have a fellow trainer, Bob McElroy, is with us today as well. A couple of things I'd like to point out first. During the presentation, please feel free to post any questions you have in the GoToWebinar control panel in the questions area of that panel on your right-hand side. And Bob will be monitoring the chat window and your questions. Now, he may answer some questions directly when they're asked, but if not, we will leave time for questions at the end of the presentation. And if there are too many to answer in the time allotted, we'll post them on Sage City afterwards. And during the presentation, I'll have a few pop-up questions that we'll go over, so be prepared to answer those as we move through the material. My next slide is just our legal disclaimer. I spend about 5 seconds on that. And then we'll talk about the contents of today's webinar. So we'll start with the customizing fields, and then an extension of that really is how to create smart lists to go with some of your fields, and that's a drop down of choices. Now you can add those smart list values manually. Another way to add them on existing data is using the fill button, so we'll show you both of those ways. And you can also use your Smart List tool to make corrections to things that aren't spelled correctly, so to get that consistency in your data that you're looking for. So lots of great tools with the Smart List feature. And then the last thing we'll go over is how to customize your asset list view and add fields that are available there. And I'll do a quick wrap up with questions and next steps once we go through those subjects. So first on our list, customizing the fields. This feature, again, it's so flexible in how it allows you to tailor the system to your type of organization. So whether you're in the manufacturing business or a service industry or retail, the field titles that are in the program may not match some of your company terms and names, so you can rename them. You can also remove fields that you don't plan to use. That will streamline your view a bit. And you can force certain fields that are required. They'll have to be filled in before the asset can be saved. And also how to set a limit to the maximum number of characters in a field and what types of values might be allowed in those fields. So I'm going to switch to the software here. You should see our company with our sample company, our test company, Westfield Bakery Training. And I'm in the asset list view of this company right now. Now to customize the fields, first of all, let me point out one of the ways to get to this feature is in the navigation pane over on this left-hand side of my screen, where you see in blue, customize a field is selected. Another way to get there is to go right to the detail view of an asset, and I'm going to go to this Dodge Ram Laramie truck, and I'll just click Asset Detail. And another way to get to customize a field is to right-click right there in the field, and you'll see the Customize Fields option there. Now, while I'm in this view, I want to point out that the fields that can be customized are only the ones you see in this top half of the display here. Notice the heading that says General Information right above the Asset ID field. So general information fields are customizable. Book information field down below this little divider are not. So we're talking only about the fields that you see at the top of the screen and the fields that were displayed in list view just a minute ago. So there's 28 total fields here that can be customized. So I'm going to select Customize Fields, And now here's the dialog box that will come up. And you'll notice custom field 5 is highlighted there on the left-hand side because that was the one I right-clicked in, the field I right-clicked in. So this list of field names are the ones that can be customized, and this view is alphabetical. And then to the right is where you would tell the program how you want to use or modify that field. So let's start with the first drop down here, the view drop down. So right now it's set to allow entry. And that means that you can put anything in that field if you have access to the company data, right? You are allowed to put a value in the field, and any user with rights to add or edit assets would have that capability. The other choices, though, are displayed in the drop-down here. Require entry. If I set the field as required, the program won't allow you to leave it blank. You'll be forced to put a value in there. Now, hopefully you'll put in the right value, but we won't check that necessarily, but we will make sure it's not left blank. And then we have view only, which means you can see what's in the field, but you wouldn't be able to change that. No one would, as a matter of fact. View only is read only, basically. And the last choice is hide. If this were a field that you weren't planning to use at all, you could hide any of these fields. And what would happen when you choose that is your list in the background there, where you see the general information, that would shrink. Every field that you hide would basically be removed from that view. So you could go from seeing 28 fields to 20 if those are the only ones you plan to use. I'll come back later and show you the hide tool with a different example. So I'm going to leave this one right now to allow entry. And then I'm going to go to the name or the title of the field, which is right below the view option. So this is the generic kind of out of the box name that we gave this field, custom field 5, not very exciting. So if you wanted to customize it with your name, you would just remove that title and type in what you want to call this field instead. And that would actually display then in list and detail view and even on reports. Now, there's lots of examples that I've run across over the years for people customizing fields. If all of your assets are in one company, and maybe you want to be able to break them down by division, you could use a field and title it division, and then you could enter each asset in the division that it's tied to. The advantage there is you can then sort reports or filter the data by division. So that's what all these fields are about. How do I get the data so I can view it and find it in a way that works for me? So division is an example. I've seen people that want to break down the county. Maybe they have to do local property tax reporting, so they want the local entity listed. So we've got one of our custom fields we use for state, and you could add another breakdown there by county, and you could call it county. So project code's another one I've seen. People want to identify the project code an asset is part of. So whatever works for you, whatever you want to call this, the example I'm going to use is going to be called data entry by. So the idea here is we want to get the name of the person that entered the asset record. So we'll put data entry by, and then we'll have a field so we can easily keep track of who the person was that entered that asset. So I'll key that in, and then I'll either click or tab down to entry mask. Entry mask is how you determine the width of the field. This field is 25 characters wide right now, and you can actually see that. That's our built-in width. And each X in that cell, in that box, represents a single character. Now, an X tells me it can be any keyboard character. I can use a letter or a number or symbols, slashes, dashes, anything goes with an X, as long as it's on your keyboard. So up to 25 characters. Now, if you wanted to create fields like that were numeric, like let's say a project code might be numbers and letters only, or might just be numbers, you could use the number 9 as your entry mask, and each 9 would represent a single digit. In fact, let me just jump down here for a second. We've got a built-in field called quantity down here towards the bottom of our customized fields, and you'll notice the mask for the quantity field is set to numbers. In fact, I can't change that field to X's. This field is a numeric field set by the program that way. So you could make any of your own fields numeric by doing the same thing. So let me go back up to custom field 5. I'm going to leave this. Oh, there's one other mask, the letter N. An N could be a number or a letter. So you could use N's, for example, or N's and nines combined to create the structure to the field that you want. So having said all that, we're going to leave our mask at 25. Now I am going to come back again after I've covered what's on this screen and show you what happens if you change a mask in the program that in a field that has information already entered. So you'll see a message and what that message means and what the results are. Next field down is called default. So we've got a field called data entry by. Is there a certain user that's always entering your assets that would be the main person that would be putting that in? If so, you might want to enter that name as the default. I'm going to put my name here. And so when a new asset is added manually, my name would automatically populate this field because I'm the most common data entry by person. So I'll leave my name in there and press tab. The message is very subtle. It will show up in the display. In fact, the very, very bottom of my screen underneath the asset list and print detail, this is where that message would display. Right now you see enter information as determined by your company. So when a user has their cursor in this custom field 5, which we've now called data entry by, whatever's typed in here will display at the bottom of the screen. So if you put in something like, what is your name? Who are you? Then the user would see that and know, oh, data entry by, they want to know who I am. If they're not sure what to put in there, it gives the eye a place to go in kind of a consistent way. And then the last option is our entry order. So if you kind of look behind this pop-up window where we've got our general information field displayed, asset ID up there in that upper left side, that's actually the first field in the order. And then description would be the second one. It goes left to right. So this particular field is pretty far down the list. In fact, it's 23rd right now. Now, I could change that, but what you want to know about changing it is whatever you change it to will just switch places with the value that had that slot before. So if I put this one as my first field, asset ID is going to jump down to 23rd. So be careful about changing the order. If you want to lay out the screen in a certain way to make it match a form or a way that you're used to entering things, by all means, take advantage of this to do that. Just be aware that one change is automatically going to make a change to something else. So that's customizing the field. So let me just show you now what's going to happen here if I close this window. Now I don't see any difference in this Dodge Ram Laramie because I do see the data entry by, but I don't see my name going in this field. That's because it's an existing asset. So if I come up to my add an asset screen, now you can see it's pretty much blank except for the data entry by field having my name in there. And I could even, typically I could save this field, this asset, except when I go down to click save, I'm going to get warned about a required field. Field entry that's set to required. The asset cannot be saved because the following field is required and must have an entry, description. Description shows up here in bold, and that's why we've made it a required field. So if you had several of these that were required, I would have gotten this message in a little list of which ones are required. So I can click OK, type in a description, and now it'll let me save it. So I see my custom name and I see my description, and now I can go back to my list view. Now before I do that, let me show you one more thing I want to tweak here. if I go back into customize a field, I mentioned hiding a field. I'm going to hide the field. Let's see, the one right above my data entry by field, property tax or PT category, custom field 3. Let me show you what happens if I hide the field. It's in use. I have some assets using that field. I'm going to hide it. Watch what happens. Everything below the field window here grays out, because if I'm not using the field, nothing more to do here. Move on. The other thing I want to show you is that mask. Let's go to department here. So let's say I decide I want to shorten my department titles. I could backspace over these X's. Each time I hit the backspace key, it's going to change my width and kind of keep track of how many are left, right? So let's say I think it should be 15 characters wide. Okay. Can I do that? Sure. When I click OK, it's going to say, wait a minute. You've modified the entry mask. This could cause a permanent loss of data. This is designed to be kind of a scary question. So let's say I just decide I want to do this anyway. I'm going to say yes. And now notice in my sample asset I entered, my data entry by field has jumped from left to right. That's because I hid the field. I hid a field above it, and so it rearranged my view a bit. So that's the hide impact. The other thing I want to show you is the impact of the mask being changed. Look at my department column right here. Several of my departments are fine, but there are some that have an asterisk displayed here. Those are the ones that are too small to fit. So that's what that message meant. It's like pound signs in Excel, right? If your field's not big enough, I can't display it. Problem is I can't just widen this field. I just told it it's 15 characters and it says, I don't know which 15 characters you want me to show, so I'm not going to show you any. So be careful. If you see asterisks in a field, that could be an indication that your mask has been changed and it's no longer wide enough to display information. Now that's an easy fix at this point. I go right back into customize my field and I put my X's back in there. As soon as I fix that, I'm going to get the warning again, but this time it's a good thing. I'm going to click OK or yes. And now my corporate office, which was the culprit, right? It was a little too wide, and so it couldn't display that anymore. So you can alter your masks. Just be aware that you could lose data over time. It didn't happen right away, but it could happen eventually if you leave it in that status. So typically people do that when they're creating the field the first time. Set the mask width the way you want. You'll still get that message that we got, but if you never use the field, it wouldn't be as important as it is when you see it changing an existing field. Okay, so that's the customized feature. I'm going to take a second here to let Bob open up a polling question for us, and I'm going to bring that up on my screen. So here's the question he's going to pop up on your screen. The entry mask field can be used to set a minimum number of characters allowed in a field. True or false? I give you a little bit of time to answer that polling question when you see it.
And the poll is open.
Thanks, Bob. Okay, let me give you about 10 more seconds here to weigh in. Okay, so.
I'm going to close the poll.
All right, thanks, Bob. Okay, so we got kind of an even split and we got a I don't know as well. So let me go ahead and share the answer to this one with you. This question is false because you can set a maximum number of characters, but not a minimum number of characters. So sometimes people say, well, I want to make sure you can put in at least 5, but no more than 10. Well, you can say no more than 10, but they could still put in 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. It wouldn't matter. So that was a little tricky. It's the maximum that you can control, but not the minimum. All right, very good, everybody. Thanks so much for that. Let's move on to our SmartList capabilities. So this feature, if you're not familiar with SmartLists, this is how you build the control into the program to prevent inconsistency in data entry so that you don't get two values that mean the same thing to you, but they've been spelled differently. Faster manual data entry is allowed with these SmartLists. You can limit the entries to just values that have been placed on the SmartList. And you can use this to make corrections. Perhaps your program was set up without SmartList capabilities. Now that you see how you can do that, you can turn it on and maybe fix some things that might have been kind of snuck in there that were entered incorrectly in the past. So again, I'm going to go back into the software and show you the SmartList feature. So this is kind of an extension of customizing fields in that the way that you get to it, notice there is a create a smart list customize feature, but if you aren't in detail view clicking in a specific cell like I did earlier, it's just going to take you right back to your customize a field window, which is fine because then you can pick the field that you want to create the smart list for. So let's go back to my custom field 5, which I've called data entry by. And let's say I'm not the only data entry possibility. We want to create a list of choices because right now that cell is just open to any name I want to put in there, although mine will go in by default. So how do you create a smart list? The first step after you've selected the field is to activate the smart list. That has to be checked, by the way, before you can do anything with your Smart List Manager button. So check first, use the button then, and now you'll be given a screen where you can add the names of the people that are possible data entry people. So for this example, I'm going to add 3 names. The name is the important part of this, by the way. The description is nice to have, but that description only displays when you're looking in the detail view of a record. It won't be on reports or anything like that. So make the name the meaningful part of your entries, and descriptions are just extra. So if Angela is an accountant, we can put her name as the description, or her title, excuse me, as the description. But again, that's not a required field. Then once you've got her name, you just click add, and she's on the list. Next, we'll enter Oscar. And I'll leave Oscar without a title. We'll just put him in with just his name. And I'll do one more, Kevin Malone. Now, it doesn't matter the order that you add the names because they're going to go in alphabetical order as you add them. So I could have put in Angela last. She's still going to jump to the very top because she is the one that starts with A. So keep that in mind. Sometimes people want things to be in a certain order. And my suggestion is, well, then put a number in front of it, right? If you want this person to be first, put 1 dash in that name, and then the 1 will make sure that they show up first. So that's how you manually add names or values to your smart list, because your smart list could, of course, be number values as well. So the add button grays out when there's nothing typed here. The replace button is grayed out right now as well. So how do I activate the replace button? Well, let me jump down here to this fill button and show you a neat little feature. So this fill button that you see here is a tool that will allow you to create a smart list. In fact, when I click on it, it will tell me exactly what it does. It says the fill feature analyzes all the assets in the company and creates a smart list entry for each unique value found. This is an excellent tool if you're turning on a smart list on an existing field. So, because when you say yes, it's going to bring in any values that it finds in the data set. And look, my name shows up here. because I was entered on that blank asset we entered a bit ago. Well, my name and the title, the description is it. So let's say I decide, oh, I don't want my name to look like this because everyone else, I've used their full name. So I could come up here and type in my full name. Notice the replace button is lighting up because I have something highlighted in my list and I've started typing something at the top. That's what triggers this. I could add, but now I'm going to have a duplicate if I click add. I don't want to click add for sure here. So I'm going to come down and click replace. And guess what? The program's going to say, hey, you're trying to replace a value on the smart list. No problem. However, FYI, I found this one asset in the current company that's going to be affected by replacing the name on the smart list. What do you want me to do with that one? And remember, this is just one. You could see this if you had 10 or 30 assets that have the old value, right? So I say, well, what do I want to do about that? Do I want to update that asset? If I say keep the original entry, the answer is no. Leave that asset the way it is, just change the smart list. That gives you two different answers to the same question. Probably not the choice you want. Blanking the original entry says, I'll go to those 10 or that one asset and I'll just leave the name blank. Data entry by nobody will be there. So that'll remove existing values. Also, probably not what you want to do. Globally replace is going to swap out the spelling that you have on the asset or assets with the name the way you've typed it in. And this is going to give you that extra capability to kind of clean up things that may have been entered incorrectly. So I'm going to say OK to that. Closes the window, comes back and shows my full name now on my list. So the fill button is great. I'm going to show you that again in a second, a little more powerful way to show that. The delete button. Okay, if I want to delete me from this list, I'm going to have a problem again because I'm in use. If I click delete, it says, hey, remember that one asset that had this value? Well, guess what? I still see this as an issue. So what do you want me to do? If you delete her from the smart list, what do you want me to do with the name that you see on the asset? Keep it or blank it out? I'm going to say cancel because I want to keep me on here. So deleting, by the way, if I delete any of the other three names, like Kevin, it's just going to go away because I haven't assigned Kevin's name to any assets. But if I had, I would have gotten that other message again. So you can delete things freely if they've never been used. Delete all would be very similar. I could clean out the whole smart list, but again, it's going to stop me because at least one of these names has been assigned to an asset record. So I'm going to cancel this again, but that is a way that you could delete everything from the smart list, and if you blank the original entry, everything in the records as well. This is very powerful because you could remove existing values. Notice we always default to the safest answer. We're not going to change your records unless you tell us to. So this is super powerful if you blanked the original entry and deleted all the smart list. So use your powers for good, not evil. We're not going to do that today. Finally, there's a print button here, and that would let you print values on a smart list. This one would be a pretty easy thing to print. There's only the three names now. But if you have longer smart lists, like your account numbers perhaps, your vendor names, you might want to print that out to have a hard copy of what is currently stored in the program. I want to focus your attention, though, to these areas at the bottom of the screen because these also contribute to making the program, again, a very powerful tool to get the management and the control that you need. Display description, as we see that's checked. That means that the space for the description field will be available when you're adding an asset. You'll see it displayed and you'll see any names that might be in there. So that's helpful. We want to leave that on. The auto drop list is a nice feature if your smart list is fairly short like ours is. What happens is when I'm tabbing through the fields, entering an asset, when I get to this field, it'll automatically show me the drop-down list, the smart list, because I've set it to auto drop. If it's a longer list, you may not be necessary to do that. You can always click in the cell and there's an arrow and you'll see the list manually rather than just automatically dropping it down. And then quick lookup, that's a great feature. What that does is if I'm in the cell and I want to change a name, I could start typing and it's going to match the typing to a name on my smart list. So if I hit the letter O, for example, when I get to this field, it'll find Oscar Martinez because his is the only name that starts with O. So it'll jump right to him. So quick lookup just speeds up your entry and matches your typing. This area to the right, the entry options, so this gives you the most control really over the kind of information or the information being entered. For example, if I said restrict entry to list, that option on this smart list means that the only 3 possible names I can enter in that cell have to exist here. I'm restricted to just these 3. So restrict entry to list is great if you've created a list of values and you don't want a user to just add their own values. You want to require them to use the ones that have been created here. And this is the only place that you could create any new values, is right here on this screen, using either the add button or the fill if you needed to. So restricting the entry is great for like your account number fields. You don't want people adding a number or accidentally typing in something that's not right. You want them to match and be fit your GL. So you definitely want to restrict certain fields, but not every field, right? There's some that you want to be a little more flexible. So for example, let me show you another example of this, not our data entry by field, but let me close this, come down and talk about the vendor field here. So the vendor field does have a smart list activated in our sample data, and I can look at my smart list manager. And you'll notice that we don't have any descriptions on these names. They're just the names of the vendors. And we did not restrict the entry to the smart list. If someone's adding an asset manually and there's a new vendor that pops up that you want to add into this field, you probably don't want to come here and add it first so that you can pull it in from the smart list. That's sort of going to slow you down, not speed up your entry at all. So what we've done is we've given you a second option. Go ahead and automatically add the entry that I'm typing in to the smart list. Well, that's an option, and there's 3 choices if you choose that option. So you're not going to restrict entries to only this screen. You're going to be a little more flexible. But if someone's typing something in now when they're adding an asset, do you always want to add that value automatically? Maybe, maybe not. So we give you 3 choices to make that decision, again, depending on the field. No auto add says you can type in whatever you want, you're allowed to, and I'm just not going to add it to your smart list ever. The auto add always is the opposite. Oh, you typed in a new value. I don't see it on the list. It's going to be added automatically by the program. That's a pretty loose interpretation as well. You could have duplicates that you don't catch right away, and the program's just going to add it. So the middle option, and you saw that that's what this was set to, that's probably the best choice. I don't want to lock everything down, but I also don't want to add something by mistake. So when I type in something new, if it's set to confirm auto add, the program's going to stop and say, hey, that's a value that we don't see on the smart list. Would you like to add it? Yes or no? If you say yes, you're adding it to the list, adding it to the asset. If you say no, you're just putting that value on the asset, but it does not come on the smart list for future use by another user. So this is kind of a good safety net to ask first before you automatically say yes or no. Just let the program prompt you to determine if you want to do yes or no on that. So those are the smart list features. And one more thing I want to show with the fill button. I used it earlier with our data entry by, which was great, but it's really super powerful if you see it in a case like this. So notice in my list view here in the background, I've got a column for model number. It's towards the right-hand side there. That's one of our custom fields. And when we added it, we did not create a smart list for that. So let's say it's reaching the point that you want to make sure that people are consistently entering these model numbers. So you go to your customized fields, you find custom field 2, I believe. Yep, I see the title there, model number. And then you turn on the smart list. Was never used before. I'm going to turn it on. I click the smart list manager. I have nothing here, but I see all these values in the program. I'm going to use the fill button. Again, it's going to ask me if I want to bring this list in. When it finds a unique value, I'm going to say yes. And now I've got a smart list built from the assets in this company. And what's nice about this is if you do see some duplicates as you scroll through, you could use the replace button and replace some duplicate entries with the right spelling. So that fill button is definitely your friend, and it will really help you out if you haven't worked with SmartLists before and you want to start getting them implemented. Okay, and on that note, let me close this and come back to another polling question for you. Let's see, let me go back to that. Go back to my screen. And the next polling question, and get ready, Bob, for this one. This is a yes/no question. In Smart List Manager, the fill button will add existing values to build or add to a smart list. Yes or no?
Okay, the poll is open.
Thanks, Bob. So we'll give you about 30 seconds, maybe a little more, depending on how quickly people respond. All right, looks like most of you have replied there. You want to go ahead and close it down,
Okay,
Bob? All right, thanks.
the poll is now closed.
All right, excellent job, you guys. I see very good response rate. The correct answer is yes. Entries from assets already entered will create or add to the smart list using the fill button. Excellent job. All right, last but not least is our customizing of the asset list view. This feature has been requested. I've been training since 2007 with Sage, and it was one of our most frequently requested features. How do we add book information to our asset list view? Until 2017, the answer was you really can't do that. But now we have given you the ability to add up to 12 depreciation book fields that are normally not part of your default view. You can remove fields from that view. That's not the same as hiding them. You can actually remove them from the view if you don't want to see them when you're looking at asset list, but you'd still see them in detail view. And that will create a more user-friendly view. And there's an export to Excel option right on our list view screen. You could add the fields you want and then get a more friendly export to Excel. I do have a note there that this is not available for our light depreciation customers. This is only in standard, network, and premier. And it is only available after 2017's update, so hopefully you're all running the latest version of the program. If you don't see it in the program, hopefully you just have to do an update to get there. But if you're on light, you will not see it. Okay, let me go back into the program again. And this feature now is also in that customize area, and it will only display when you're in the list view. You will not see this customize asset list in any other view of your assets. You have to be on the list. I click that and I get a dialog window with the 12 the 12 book fields that I can add. These are the available fields here on the left. Notice they have asterisks in their title, and those will display in the view as well so that you know that they're not standard general information fields. Then on the right, you can see the fields that are currently in your view and the order that they're in your view. Now, there's a couple things I want to make a note about. The system number column, that is always on the far left side of your view. You cannot change or move that column in any way. The note and images, you can see those columns, the piece of paper and the paper clip and the status, those are always going to be in your view as well. So those you really can't remove from this view, but I could remove asset ID or description or anything after that from the list view. But again, this would still leave it in detail view. In fact, the one I hid earlier, you can see is actually hidden here, so I don't have to do anything with that. It's already out of my view. So how would we add a field? Well, let's find one or two or three, as many as you want. In fact, if there are several, you can just click and drag your mouse to highlight the ones you want. I'm just going to do two of these. I'm going to do acquisition value, and then I'm going to hold down my control key on my keyboard and click on net book value. So if they're not consecutive, you can just control click and grab the ones you want. That lights up these double arrows in the middle of the screen. So I click once and they'll come out of the left-hand side. You may not see them right away on the right-hand side because they do go to the end automatically. And then you could move them both or individually. I'm going to move them both up a bit. Each time I click this up to reorder fields, they're going to move. Just think of them moving as one column to the left. So I'm going to have to click it several times if I want to basically see them in my view. I may have to go, let's see here. I may have to go in front of model number. So then if I didn't want them together, I could take one and just move it down, right? So I moved them together, but I can still rearrange them. And I can move any of these columns up or down, not just the ones I've added, but if I want to rearrange my view, this is a nice way to do that. I can also remove things. There's a couple fields here that we don't really use in this company, and we don't really have values in these two fields, so I'm just going to get rid of them, move them out of my view. Again, they're still in the program, still in the detail view, just not going to show up as columns as I scroll to the right. So you can add, remove, rearrange the order, and the final is the select book. So the default is the tax book in this company. That's our first open book. So that's always going to be the go-to book for this. And then I see the other books listed. So I could pick the values from any of these books, but I can only do one at a time. So if I want to see the tax information, I can click easily to see that, but if I want to come back to internal, I'd have to come back to this view, change this to internal. And I want to make a little comment here about the Restore Defaults button as well. This was in the Customize window too, and when you click Restore Defaults, it resets it back to like the factory settings. So be careful about that kind of option. These settings that I'm setting right here are going to stay this way on this computer and in this company for as long as I leave them this way. But as long as if I click Restore Default, it's going to undo any of that. So I'm going to click OK. So I got a little screen refresh there. As I scroll over now, you'll notice the acquisition value with the asterisk in it. And I moved the net book value, which we've abbreviated here to NBV, a little farther over, also with an asterisk. Above the list is the asterisk in the heading showing me this is from the internal book. But now that I have those two values, in this view, you can sort by any of these fields. So I could sort by net book value, just double clicking on that, turns it orange. These are all my assets that are fully depreciated. If I double click a second time, it'll go in descending order. So any one of these fields you can double click on, which is great. And then the export to Excel, you could click on that and they would come out with all these columns in this order that you had selected that's highlighted in orange. So it's a really great tool to be able to add as many book fields as you might want in this view, and it does make a nice clean export to Excel. So not everything's there, but 12 is pretty good, and you can get your current year-to-date, current accum, all of that information as columns here. Okay, so that's the customizing of the asset list view. Let me go back to our last polling question for you. And here it is. Bob's going to bring this up for you. So in the asset list view, critical book fields can be added from one of the available books. Yes or no?
The poll is now open.
Okay, thanks, Bob. All right, let's give it about 10 more seconds. Okay, looks like we've got most people voting, so thanks,
Okay.
Bob.
The poll is closed.
Okay, so the correct answer here is yes. So only one book at a time can be shown, but all 5 critical fields plus 7 more fields like year to date or current accum can be added to the view. So when we talk about the critical fields, right, the property type, placed in service date, acquisition value, depreciation method, estimated life, those are the big 5, and those are all able to be added to the view from whichever book you pick. Okay, thanks so much, everybody. Let me just move into the next steps. And that would basically give you the opportunity just to mention, or give me the opportunity to mention some of the other training opportunities available. So while I'm going over this, feel free to post any questions that you have in the GoToWebinar questions panel now. I think sometimes they take a few seconds to show up there. So Bob will be able to take a look at those. So let me go over the fact that these topics that we covered today are in our basic depreciation class. Now we have an instructor-led basic class, which you can find on Sage University. And that's where we would walk you through all of these. You get hands-on training during the class. You get the instructor there to answer your questions and go through the material. And we go through some real world scenarios, and we also take suggestions from the class. So we have basic and intermediate depreciation, probably our biggest classes, and this topic is covered in basic. It's also in an anytime learning class, which is a recording that you can find on Sage University as well. And take advantage of those anytime learnings through the end of this month. They are available for free to our customer base. So you can find those on the sageu.com/fixed assets. And if you did see a feature that you don't have, feel free to call in and talk to our sales reps too to see if you can add a feature or upgrade your program. And I do have my promo code listed here. If you did take one of our instructor-led courses, when you purchase that on SageU, there's an option at the checkout where you can add my code and get an extra 10% discount on any in addition to any other discounts that you have. So that's TRN and then ANTHO, and the number 10 would go in that promo code window. All right, let's open up the meeting, see if we have any questions that have been posed for Bob.
Well, great job, Ann.
Thank you.
Really great job. Here is one interesting question. How helpful is it really to use SmartList? Well, let me tell you, they can be very helpful. One reason is it's a way of standardizing the kind of values that you see across a field. So Anne mentioned, for example, perhaps you've got a column to designate the division where the asset is located. And so let's say that you've got a northeastern division. Well, somebody might type in NE, or somebody might spell out northeast, or maybe somebody else types in northeastern, you see. So you could get different ways of people trying to say the same thing. But if they had been able to select that from a menu of options, you see, it has a way of ensuring greater consistency, greater uniformity across your values in a field. And so there's a big advantage to that if you're looking for assets that all meet certain criteria. Another advantage is it has a way of enforcing accuracy. And let's say that you've got a field to denote the location of the asset. And let's say that one asset is located at Dallas. And so somebody types in Dallas, but they make a typo and they spell it with just one L. Well, if I'm looking for all assets located at Dallas, I may overlook those that were entered with a typo, you see. And so if they had been able to select Dallas from a menu of choices, and that's really what a smart list is, then it has a way of ensuring greater accuracy in the values that are in your database. And finally, there's another advantage. Smart lists add a lot of efficiency to your work because as you saw from what Anne was showing you, smart lists come into play when you're creating or you're editing an asset record, but they also come into play with other operations. So if you're trying to manage the groups, maybe to create a group or edit a group, the smart lists come into play. If you're trying to transfer an asset, again, they're used. Or if you're using the global replace tool to replace some of the data values, again, they come into play. So it can add a lot of efficiency because they're used in various operations like what I've just described. But that's a great question. Any other questions? Well, listen, let me turn it back to Anne for some final comments. Anne?
Thanks, Bob. Yeah, you had made a great point there. I did some training recently where we didn't have smart lists set up. We did a new company and imported. We didn't have a smart list set up. When we were creating groups, I went, oh, we've got to turn on some of these smart lists because we've got to use that fill button because it really did slow down our group creation without having a list of options to just pick from. It was very user friendly for that. All right. Well, thanks for the help with the questions, Bob. And I guess we might wrap up a little bit early here. And no one, I'm sure, will complain about that. One more slide I want to point out here. If you only remember one website that I mentioned in this presentation, then this is probably the best one to keep in mind, www.sagecity.com/resources. From this screen, you would select your country or region, and then you would get a second question once that's been selected of your product. And then you go right to Sage City, but there are links to our Sage University, our Sage Knowledge Base, and I think once you get to the fixed asset products, you can also find the link to signing up for these webinars. So this one-stop shopping place basically will open up all of the other Sage websites for you to take advantage of that. So www.sagecity.com/resources. You can bookmark that, and then you'll have an easy way to find all of our online help. All right, so thank you all so much. If you let me mention you will be receiving, a follow-up email, and there'll be a link to a recording of this session. We will also be repeating this next week, so if you have other people at your company that would benefit from this, we have another one scheduled on June 18th, and we do have several ongoing learning series scheduled out through the end of the year. So be sure to take a look at that and see if you want to enroll or register for any other webinars or looking for a training class, check out Sage University for that. So thanks so much, and I hope you'll join us for another session, or we'll talk to you in one of our classes.